everyone, I'm Stephanie Arell, and today I'm going to talk to you just briefly, scratching the little surface here of this topic, which has to do with resourcing physically in relationship to having a trauma background. I want to enter this realm of thinking about what's called somatics, illustrating first that one thing that people experience who have a trauma history in relationship to a traumatic event has to do with the reality that the effects of trauma are physical. Yes, they are mental. Yes, they are psychological, emotional, but also physical. If we go back to thinking about the definition of trauma in terms of Judith Herman, who's my go-to, I also will use a little bit of Bruce Perry. There are lots of definitions out there, but I like these two. One, Judith Herman talks about trauma as an experience that inspires simultaneously terror and helplessness. Helplessness, I can't do anything about this. I'm totally out of control. Terror is a fear response. Fear is physical. If you can recall, anytime you've been afraid of anything, it is a visceral, embodied response to whatever's before you that's instigating that fear. When it gets into the realm of trauma, it's classified in her terms, and I agree, as terror. That is an extreme physical response to some stimuli that is threatening. If we consider Bruce Perry's definition, who's done a lot of work with children, and if any of you want to read him, he did a fantastic book with Oprah Winfrey called What Happened to You. I highly recommend it. His definition has to do with an overwhelming experience that permanently alters our stress systems. Again, physical. Stress, cortisol, anxiety. Cortisol is a hormone. Anxiety is more a description of the experience. We're hyperreactive to stimuli that other people that don't have the experience would not be reactive to, and that reaction is physical. What does that mean for me to tell you, which you probably already know this is sort of evident. It's just that a lot of times when we're talking about things that are traumatic, the evident things somehow slip from our grasp because the psychological and cognitive thinking about all of this is itself overwhelming and feeds into the physical. If trauma is so physical, then part of the recovery process has to be physical. Now, that's a very long video. It's actually probably a course to talk about this. And another person who does a lot of it is Bessel van der Kolk, and his book, Body Keeps the Score. And they are not the only. Peter Levine, Gabor Mate. I mean, I could make a long list of people who do work around this. But what I want to focus on today has to do with just a tiny little piece of somatics or working with the body that's in relationship to what we would call resourcing. I mentioned this in a video where I talk about fight, flight, and freeze mechanism. What I mention in that video, I just briefly talk about it, has to do with the way that we have an innate capability to heal ourselves. Now, heal is a word I go back and forth on in terms of thinking about how effective it is, because it implies that you can kind of fix something that happened in the past and eradicate it, and I don't actually buy that. But I do think on a cellular level that as organisms, as biological organisms, just like animals, we are capable of healing our wounds, so to speak, okay? And healing having this property that has to do with making ourselves feel better or increasing resilience or going through recovery. So that sense of the word. I would like to take this rest of this video to encourage you to try as a practice. When you feel anxiety, some hypercharge, a trigger at work, a trigger at school that leaves you panicked, if you can take a moment, go to the side and think about someone or something that offers a physical feeling that's opposite to what you're experiencing. When I did this exercise as a matter of practice for thinking about somatic experiencing training, I remember the story that I was telling that was triggering related to an experience with a man who violated some boundaries of mine verbally. And the therapist that I was practicing with asked me, is there a man who's the opposite of that? And I thought of a friend, and I'll tell you this story. I was traveling alone in a foreign country, and I was in a space where I felt very nervous about being alone as a woman, and I knew that I had a friend that was staying close by, and I called him and asked him if he would accompany me for 3 days so that I didn't have this feeling of threat as I was walking around by myself, and he said yes. And he's a terrific, great friend. He's also a professor, and we had a great time together. When I reflect on my experience with him and the friendship that we continue, I have a physiological response, calm, some joy, some happiness. I enjoy seeing him, but the physiology, the physical feeling I have is exactly opposite of someone, male, violating my boundaries, even verbally. In imagining my friendship with him and what he offered in this foreign country, and I'm not naming it because I don't want to give stigma to any given location, because there were many factors that came into play related to the experience. But when I think about my friendship with him, the physiological feeling I have is the exact opposite, as I've said. I repeat myself because what's important is less thinking about the people or the details, more trying to access that physiological feeling of resourcing that counters the negative or charged emotional experience that's so often attached to a traumatic past. What it kind of gives us light to is the capacity of our internal experiences that are positive, that when they're fed, when we see them, when we feel them, they can start to counter the negative anxiety or fear. But what this brings me to is thinking about, if you have a traumatic past and it gets triggered, it's probably going to be pretty hard to then sit down yourself and reflect on experience and have the cognitive skills to access what I'm illustrating related to this physiology. So what can you do? Things that are physical will be helpful. So what are the things that you can do? The first thing that comes to my mind has to do with touch. One thing I offered somebody once was a type of yarn, it was a little square. It looked like a small dish towel that could be put into the pocket. It's very, very, very soft. So if the trigger occurs, that feeling of something soft was the immediate counter to the trigger. I really like cool water. So if I have the ability to walk outside and dip my feet into the Long Island Sound, that offers me some comfort. So is there an experience that you enjoy physically that you can have at access on hand as quickly as possible? Maybe that's a warm drink. Maybe that's meditating on your best friend and when she came to your birthday once. Anything that you can have at hand that gives you the physiological experience that counters any given trigger. But I do think thinking about it ahead of time, maybe writing it down somewhere, maybe having some tools around, like that little piece of fabric in your pocket, or maybe you have a particular stuffed animal that you liked as a kid that you can put on your desk or put in your room somewhere. One of the things I have on my bed is a very fluffy fur-like pillow. I don't use it that often, but I know that it's there so that if I need something comforting right away, I can just go put my head on that pillow. I also think just simply thinking about resourcing yourself with positive feelings, memories that give you that physiological peace. Meditating is what people will say, right? So breathing exercises. But I think we even have access to more physiological pleasure. And when we allow ourselves, that can be a counter to the negative physiological effects of trauma. Thanks.